Hi everyone, my name is Mary Colminen. Today we'll be talking about an example of excellent leadership. His name is Geoffrey Canada. I'm really excited to talk about Mr. Canada and all the work that he's done for education. It's always refreshing to hear from people who are passionate about improving the educational system, but it's less often that we actually get to see someone who's done a great deal of work for the sake of quality education. There's always work to be done with education. There's always room for improvement. We're never going to reach a day where we're like, yep, this is as good as education is going to possibly get, and there's nothing new we can add. It's all downhill from here. Geoffrey Canada would tell you that we're far from ever reaching something that could be seen as perfection in education. All this to say, I'm very excited to tell you more about Mr. Canada, the good he has done for education, his leadership style, and his lasting impact on the educational industry. To begin, I'll give you a bit of background about Mr. Canada. Geoffrey Canada grew up in South Bronx of New York in a neighborhood that suffered from poverty and violence. During his TED Talk from 2013, Canada mentions the poor K-12 schooling that he received and how the same institution that he attended all those years ago hasn't really gotten any better. 56 years later, they are still using the same approach as when he was in school. What works for some kids is great, and then when it doesn't work for others, all they can say is, tough, you don't fit into our system. And that's how we lose kids in school. That's the problem. Canada's school is by no means the only institution guilty of this, though, either. After high school, though, Canada went on to experience quality education at the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral level. Canada's real-life experiences helped him be more realistic about the changes that he desired to make and has made in various communities. Next, we're going to take a look at Geoffrey Canada's professional journey. Canada received his undergraduate degree in psychology and sociology from Bowdoin College in Maine, and later graduated with a master's in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Today, he holds the title of Dr. Geoffrey Canada. Mr. Canada has appeared on 60 Minutes, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Anderson Cooper 360, and more, along with being featured in articles by The Washington Post, Forbes magazine, and the Associated Press. Most notably, Geoffrey Canada served as the president and CEO of Harlem Children's Zone from 1990 to 2014. He served as president for 40 years. Let's take a second to talk about what Harlem Children's Zone is and its importance. The purpose of Harlem Children's Zone is to end intergenerational poverty in central Harlem and to make a way for other long distressed communities around the world and around our country to do the same. Harlem Children's Zone provides programs for early childhood, education, career, community outreach, and wellness initiatives. Now let's talk about authentic leadership, which is the leadership theory that I've chosen to dive into regarding Geoffrey Canada and his leadership approaches and how those two are intertwined. Authentic leadership is tough to define because there isn't a single concrete definition for it. But just like leadership, we learn a lot by example. In one of the video clips from Chapter 9 of our virtual textbook, Ken Perry talks about the definition of authentic leadership and sums it up quite nicely by saying, many people like myself might say that if we're authentic and there's authenticity in what we do, then, well, we are demonstrating leadership. There is no other kind. I watched Canada's TED Talk, and within just the first few seconds, I could tell that I was going to like him a lot and that I could trust him. He grounded himself, he talked about his family, and made the audience laugh even. While humor isn't an essential part of establishing leadership, it's one technique that makes us appear very human and very real. Emotions remind people that we are indeed human. Geoffrey Canada goes into the next section of his speech and really begins to dive deep with this quote. "This is why I'm excited. but I'm angry. This year, there are going to be millions of our children that we're going to needlessly lose. That we could, right now, we could save them all. So Canada's really honest about his frustration regarding this educational wall, if you will. He doesn't try and hide his frustration. He appeals to the emotional side of everyone in that audience. He creates a legitimate sense of urgency and opportunity for change to save our students and our children from ever having to fail again. So next, we're going to take a moment to talk about the positive impact that Geoffrey Canada's work in Harlem Children's Zone has made. Mr. Canada's leadership for Harlem Children's Zone has created miraculous results. And the statistics show. Canada has a short Q&A moment with singer John Legend, which was pretty cool, at the end of his TED Talk. And Canada shares that in 2013, 100% of the students who participated in Harlem Children's Zone graduated high school in 2013, and 93% of those same students were accepted into a college or university. I think this is truly impressive. And Canada even takes a moment to reassure the audience, we're going to get to that other 7% of those students who haven't been accepted yet. They're waiting on their letters. We're going to push for them. So Canada's form of leadership and being authentic, his goal is to encourage his students never to fail. And I know that we often talk about how failure is essential, and sometimes we learn a lot from our mistakes. But we should never go into a situation thinking that we're going to fail or being okay with failing, which is what a lot of these kids were doing. Is they were coming into school and they were just automatically anticipating that they were going to drop out and that they were going to give up and that it didn't matter what their grades were going to be. And Canada's mission as an educator and president of Harlem Children's Zone is to eliminate that toxic mindset of, I'm going to go through the motions of school, and if I graduate, I graduate. If not, whatever. He encourages kids to be excited about education and about their learning, and so have all of the other programs that the children have been involved in Harlem Children's Zone. It boosts morale, it gets them excited about going to school, and when they're involved in other areas of life, like in community involvement, extracurriculars, sports, and looking at education beyond high school, it gets them excited about the now. So I really like that he takes time to say, I'm not going to let these kids fail. Everybody makes mistakes, everybody's going to falter every now and then, but eliminating the mindset of failure is inevitable. It's okay. We're going to fail. Everybody fails every now and then. And saying, we're going to try really hard not to fail. We're going to try really hard to succeed. Failure is going to happen, but we're not going to settle for it. And we're going to learn from it. I think it's truly impressive and really inspiring and authentic. So finally, what can we learn from Geoffrey Canada? What can we learn from authentic leadership and the combination of those two? I learned it's always better to be yourself than to put on what I would call a leadership facade, if you will. Followers can see right through a fake leader, which is why when we think of good leaders, typically, they're very authentic leaders. They're down to earth. They're conversational. Especially when you are an educator, when your leadership position is an educator, because students are really going to pick on your fakeness. Other educators, too, will pick up on your fakeness. I was a theater education major for 2 years at Ball State before I became a communications major. I worked with middle schoolers and I worked with high schoolers when I would direct productions and teach lessons to the kids in the Muncie area. And I learned very quickly that there was no use in trying to put on a production besides the one that we were working on in the theater. There was no use for me to try and put on a production or put on a show for them and try and act above who I really was. That didn't work in my favor. I learned very quickly that grounding myself and being authentic and not trying to be all showy, taking off my mask is going to get through to people a lot better than being overly presentational and trying to talk above myself and using big words and things like that. Jeffrey shows this in his TED Talk as well. He stays professional, but he talks to people for who they are. They're people. It's almost like he struck up a conversation out of the blue. And that's what I love about this TED Talk so much, is that he taught the audience so much, but he plays the whole thing off as just a meaningful conversation that he happened to conjure with somebody. But in reality, he's talking to a mass audience, and it seems to really get through to all of them. At least it got through to me. So to wrap things up, I have learned a lot from Geoffrey Canada and from his leadership style of being authentic. And whether that was something he did intentionally or not, I believe that part of it was intentional. When he begins his TED Talk, he's like very conversational, and there's no walls put up. He just gets right to the nitty gritty, right to the good stuff. And I think that we can learn a lot from that. When we were focusing on authentic leadership, when that was like the chapter that we were looking at for that week and the assignments and stuff, it really tugged at me. And I had to look at myself as a leader and say, well, am I being authentic? Am I saying what I should be saying? Am I trying to be somebody that I'm not when I'm in a position of power, if you will? So this TED Talk was really eye-opening, and I feel that Geoffrey Canada is an excellent example of leadership, authentic leadership even. Yeah. And I've included a slide with all of the citations that I used for words that were not mine. So thank you very much for listening.